I didn't climb into India's elite circles by being smart. I climbed in by noticing who pretended not to be. I used to think rich people announced themselves. Loud money, flashy confidence. That was before I learned the real ones build rooms so quiet you forget you're being tested. The first time I entered one of those rooms, I wasn't invited. I was approved. The address was Malabar Hill, the kind of apartment where the elevator opens directly into the living room. Not for luxury, but so security knows exactly who steps inside. No waiting area. No witnesses. There were maybe 15 people there. That was intentional. Anything above that number becomes an event. Anything below stays a conversation. Everyone was calm. Too calm. Like surgeons waiting for anesthesia to kick in. I was 26, working at a consulting firm whose entire business model was translating unethical decisions into professional language. I was good at it. Not brilliant. Useful. That's why I was there. The host was Arvind Shah. Old money without old manners. Plain kurta, cheap watch, leather sandals. He didn't greet anyone loudly. He didn't need to. Everyone already knew where to stand around him. I noticed something early. Nobody introduced themselves. If you didn't know who someone was, that was your failure. Drinks were poured by staff who had signed NDAs longer than my employment contract. Conversations overlapped but never collided. People spoke in fragments, trusting others to complete the thought. Clearance would take longer than expected. His daughter was applying abroad and timing mattered. The board was nervous, but they would follow. I kept quiet. Silence isn't absence in these rooms. It's camouflage. At some point, a man near the window looked at me and said I was the new one. It wasn't a question. I nodded. He smiled, not kindly. He said new people were useful because they hadn't decided who they were loyal to yet. That was my introduction to Vikram Malhotra. He didn't own companies. He sat on boards until companies changed direction. Regulators returned his calls. Politicians used his phrasing. He asked what I did. I said I helped people decide what not to put in writing. He laughed. A real laugh. That's when I felt the shift. Acceptance doesn't feel warm. It feels efficient. Dinner was served. No seating plan, which was the seating plan. I ended up between a woman who ran a nonprofit that conveniently overlapped with multiple mining interests, and a man whose family controlled logistics routes nobody outside the industry even knew existed. Nobody discussed numbers. They discussed timing. Someone mentioned a mid-sized pharmaceutical company expanding too fast. Another remarked that their compliance team was ambitious. A third said nothing but raised an eyebrow. I didn't know it yet, but that company was already dead. The dinner was just the obituary being drafted. Nobody in that room hated anyone. That's the part people don't like to hear. This wasn't personal. Hate is noisy. Indifference is clean. Later on the balcony, Vikram asked me what I thought of the pharma company. I said they would struggle with scale. He shook his head. He said they would struggle with patience. He explained how 3 approvals delayed just long enough could spook investors. How a whistleblower complaint didn't need to be proven to be useful. How banks get nervous when certain names stop returning calls. He wasn't boasting. He was teaching. People think power is pressure, he said. It isn't. It's friction. That night he offered new work. Off books, advisory, short memos, nothing traceable. I told myself I was observing, not participating. That lasted 6 weeks. The first memo I wrote helped a family office decide when to leak concerns about a rival's governance. The leak wasn't false. That was the genius. Truth, weaponized by timing. The rival's stock dipped, then dipped again. Employees panicked. Talent left. Credit tightened. I watched it happen from a spreadsheet. I didn't lose sleep. That came later. What I gained instead was access. More dinners. More apartments with no neighbors. More conversations where people spoke about the country like a portfolio. I learned which journalists took calls late at night. Which judges were tired, not corrupt. Which NGOs were genuine and therefore easiest to use as shields. I learned the real hierarchy. Not wealth. Not politics. Plausible deniability. The richest man in the room was usually the least protected. The safest ones were invisible. At some point I stopped being impressed. That's when I became dangerous. I noticed patterns others missed. How Vikram always positioned younger consultants between rivals. How Arvind never spoke first and only summarized. How certain women, often ignored by louder men, were actually the final filters. I realized the system didn't just crush outsiders, it trained insiders to self-select. The ambitious burned out. The ethical walked away. The adaptable stayed. I stayed until the night I recognized myself. There was a new guy at a dinner in Juhu. Same nervous confidence I once had. Sharp suit. Listening too hard. Laughing half a second late. Someone asked him a question designed to corner him ethically. He answered carefully, too carefully. I saw the approval ripple through the room. Without thinking, I said he would be useful. The words landed heavier than I expected. That's when it hit me. I wasn't observing anymore. I was placing people. That night I went home and opened a folder I hadn't touched in years. Old memos. Early drafts. Advice that had become outcomes. I realized something worse than guilt. None of it was illegal. That's how the system survives. Not by breaking laws, but by exhausting anyone who tries to enforce them. I didn't leave dramatically. People don't exit power structures that way. They fade. I stopped attending dinners. Took fewer calls. Became busy. That's the polite way to disappear. Someone else took my place. Someone always does. Now I work a job that looks impressive and does less harm. I'm still adjacent. Just not embedded. I'm telling you this because everyone wants a villain. A name. A face. You won't get one. The smartest people I met weren't evil. They were calm, patient, and very good at math. They don't fear exposure. They fear unpredictability. And if there's one thing that actually scares India's quiet elite, it isn't anger or protest or reform. It's someone who understands the system and decides not to play along quietly.